because within the next 10 years, we need 3 times as much energy as we do now. So it's not enough to just transition what we have now. We have to expand our energy production massively. And new technologies, I mean, blockchain, we know Bitcoin mining uses energy, but like AI, everybody loves ChatGPT, but we don't talk enough about how much energy it uses.
Yeah.
So we need to really further that energy field. And for me, this is a field that has a massive future opportunity.
Hello and welcome, everybody. I'm your host, Sergey Kiklevich. This is another episode of On-Chain Attention Podcast. I have a very exciting guest today. It sets up for a very interesting conversation. His name is Jakob Stammler. He is from Switzerland. He's the head of blockchain operations for an interesting company in the blockchain space called Powerledger. He's also a task force member, kind of a unique description. I don't have many people like this that are involved from a policy perspective. It's a task force on digitalization in energy with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Jakob, hello and welcome. Please introduce yourself and let's get this thing started.
Yeah, hi, Sergey. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for inviting me to the podcast. I'm very excited to talk to you about a sector within blockchain that is not very often talked about, the energy sector, but a sector that is important to everyone, because without it, none of this would be here. We wouldn't be talking about crypto. We wouldn't be talking about buzzwords like AI. Very relevant, and excited to tell you a bit more about it.
Yeah, welcome. And thank you for your time here. I know that most of your work sits really at the intersection of several things, right? Web3, crypto, blockchain, however we talk about it. Then, of course, energy, both traditional and evolving field of it. Then all kinds of things, sustainability related to the energy, and just global policy. You're a power maker there. You are a very active person. I've seen your posts, I've seen your speeches as well. And when my colleagues met you, they spoke very highly of you, and we immediately wanted to have you as a guest here because this topic of energy is kind of antiquated in a traditional sense, but then there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes. So somebody like you, Jakob, please tell us, what does Powerledger do? Give us a little bit of a background of the company, and then, of course, anytime you can talk about your story, how you got into this. Let's introduce that too.
Yeah, that's great. For Powerledger, we're a company. We've been around since 2016, and the reason why we've been around is because the energy grid that exists today is still very traditional. You said it; it's very antiquated. We have one large energy production somewhere. We transport or transmit that energy to a distribution grid, and then consumers consume it. You as a household owner or as a manufacturing plant or whatever, you consume the energy. It's kind of a one direction grid.
Yeah.
However, obviously with the higher demand of energy and the increase in the number of renewable energy sources, consumers are no longer just consumers, they're prosumers. So they often produce their own energy. They have photovoltaic, so solar cells on their rooftops. There's wind farms that you see in the landscapes. There's energy that the renewable energy that will enter the grid from different areas. So it's no longer just a unidirectional grid, it becomes a bidirectional grid. And with that comes several different challenges because this traditional grid is just not laid out for this type of energy source. And what we're doing in its very essence is we build software that is blockchain based. So we're a Web3 first company, but we build software for energy companies, energy distributors, energy suppliers that can be integrated within their software so that the users from these energy suppliers can then trade renewable energy in a peer-to-peer market. So what that really means, to give you a specific example, is let's say you have solar panels on your rooftop and you're at work during the day, you're in your office, and you have an overproduction of energy because obviously you live in Florida, there's a lot of sun, and you've already charged your 3 Teslas outside, and like there's no use for that extra energy. What's currently happening is you have 2 ways. Either you stop producing energy, which is not beneficial, because if we
Yeah,
already have the capacity to produce renewable energy, then we'd rather have the renewable energy than any one based on fossil fuels.
correct.
So that's number one. The other thing that happens is you have to feed it back to the grid. In certain countries, this could even cost you money to feed it back, because there's costs associated for the grid to take back up your energy. So you're not even making money from energy that you're producing. And that's just a lose-lose situation for
Yeah.
everyone. So what we basically offer is we offer people and companies a way to monetize their overproduction of energy by trading it to people that use this energy during the time. So if you as a household, for example, have excess energy, you can then sell it to a manufacturing company that uses it to produce something, whether that's a bakery, a brewery, you name it, whoever kind of uses it
Hmm.
during the day. They pay less than what they would pay if they just got it from the grid, and you get more in financial terms than you would from just feeding it back to the grid. So it's really a win-win situation for everyone, and that's what we do in essence.
Wow, interesting. And since you said Web3 first, right? It's a blockchain based software. What was the idea, the logic, in simple terms, behind integrating that type of technology into this solution?
Well, in the interesting thing, it all kind of starts with decentralization. Again, looking back, the traditional grid was very centralized. You have a few entities that um, are along the value chain of the grid, usually like very big production sites, but few of them. Whereas
Hmm.
now you have very kind of decentralized energy production, because every household basically can now become their own energy producer.
Hmm.
And that requires a decentralized solution. And what better solution than blockchain, just as it is basically a data layer that is specifically designed for decentralization. And then there's obviously other reasons why blockchain or Web3 is so important in this use case. One
Hmm.
is ease for customers. So it is really, really easy for them to have like demand response programs.
Hmm.
They have smart contracts that they could use to automate it. Because also as a homeowner, you don't necessarily want to deal with trading your energy, right? It's not something
Right.
you have time for. But if I have a smart contract that automates it for me, or I even have a smart AI prediction that forecasts my energy
Hmm.
consumption, then that really optimizes my personal energy usage and makes sure that I always consume my own energy at the cheapest price, but still makes me money when I don't use it. And this is where it really happens. And then another point that a lot of
Hmm.
people don't know about, but that is quite relevant, is that currently in electricity billing, around 17% of all electricity bills are faulty. And that's just
17?
17%.
That's a lot.
It's a massive amount, and it's not very well known. That includes manufacturing, that
What?
includes homeowners, and the reason for that is just there's no way for you to actually know how much energy you've used. You have maybe a smart meter that will tell you how much has
Hmm.
been used, but it's very difficult for you to really be able to tell whether those numbers are
Mm.
accurate or not. Otherwise, you would have to measure every energy consumption of any device that you have at home, and it gets even more difficult if you live in
Hmm.
a like in an apartment with other families where there's only a
Hmm.
few smart meters, not for each condo or for each apartment individually.
Correct.
So there's a lot of issues in that regard, and the great thing about blockchain, the real benefit here is just the immutability of that. So
Mm.
any type of transaction or any type of recording that is done cannot be mixed up. There's no way. It's always clear where consumption comes from, where the
Hmm.
energy comes from. This is especially important when you also have to track that your energy is renewable. If you have to, if you're for example, as a company, you've made a commitment that you're going to cut down on your energy consumption and on your overall emissions.
Hmm.
You have to prove that your energy has been renewably sourced, and blockchain can all verify that. It can not only verify that, it's a trustless peer-to-peer system that just allows you to have this security that is important for you, because we're talking about billions of dollars, a massive
Yeah.
industry.
Wow. Yeah, you just hit a couple of interesting points that we'll elaborate on. And before we do, I'm always interested in this personal
Yeah.
side of the equation. Like, what drew you personally to this intersection of Web3 and energy? How did you get into this space? What was the story behind it?
Yeah. For me, I've been in the Web3 space, in the blockchain space for a while now,
Mm-hmm.
with other companies before that as well. I Before joining Powerledger, I worked really in an ecosystem role, working for a large layer one blockchain, and which was incredible, which was an incredible learning experience because you had to suddenly deal with all these different types of projects. I'm talking gaming, arts, sports partnerships,
Mm-hmm.
you name it. It basically everything is on chain, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
know how large the breadth of sectors are that are being serviced by blockchain.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, what was missing working for a layer one directly was this specific use case where you saw kind of this real impact that you were having with the work that you were building for. If I had worked for, let's say, a Dex or even something like Pump.fun, like Pump Fun that we all know
Mm-hmm.
and either love or hate, whatever it is, like you at least have a product that you work on, that you improve. With the layer one, of course, you have improvements to the protocol over time, but you're more really managing that everyone that is building has what is necessary to build. An incredibly important job, but for me, it was important to put it into something that I truly believe in. And the energy market coming from Europe,
Mm-hmm.
energy is a big topic. I mean,
Yeah.
we've all seen Germany famously shut down their last nuclear power plant when they were already running out of energy, kind of
Mm-hmm.
moving back to coal and becoming more dependent on coal or becoming more dependent on energy imports from other countries. And for me, I just like I couldn't believe that a country as modern as Germany was going in that direction.
Yeah.
And that's not throwing shade at Germany because this is
Correct.
an issue that happens across different countries. I'm just using it to show that the energy market is extremely difficult and we cannot just think about how do we solve it now, because people always talk like you. I'm sure you've heard the term energy transition,
Mm-hmm.
and like people talk about it in the way that we need to move to more renewable sourced energies. We need to move to maybe more nuclear power, and get rid of kind of the fossil fuel usage that we have just to become to counteract the global warming. But it's even more so than just that. I would call it, or we internally call it, an energy expansion, because we don't just have to make sure that our current energy usage becomes renewable. We
Yeah.
have to make sure that our energy consumption or energy production for the next 10 plus years becomes renewable as well. Because within the next 10 years, we need 3 times as much energy as we do now. So it's not enough to just transition what we have now. We have to expand our energy production massively. And new technologies, I mean, blockchain, we know Bitcoin mining uses energy, but like AI, everybody loves ChatGPT, but we don't talk enough about how much energy it uses.
Yeah.
So we need to really further that energy field. And for me, this is a field that has a massive future opportunity. I believe technology will be extremely important to solve these questions and and make the field future ready.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I chose to kind of lean into it.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. For whatever reason, what came to my mind, there's a book called How Big Things Are Built. I believe that's the title. Somewhere towards the end in the chapters, they talk about the example of Denmark and Norway, I believe, and the energy projects that they took on. Um, this must have been already 10 years ago, but this perspective of, hey, we got to look at it 20 years out, 25, 30 years out, not just right here and right now, is what leads to actually solutions. So I love that you brought that perspective to the conversation, because a lot of people think with the now. And it's great to think about the now in certain cases, but when it comes to business and sustainability and making sure that we don't profit at the expense of everything around us collapsing, so to say, it's important to think long term and strategically out there. Given that we're talking a little bit about further out and the future out there, do you have a take on what's possible in the energy sector using the technologies that are coming to the market today? Obviously, blockchain, you mentioned AI as well, which is starting to kind of intersect with blockchain as well. What's your look out there 10, 15 years from today?
So I think blockchain will for sure be one of the technologies that will become kind of an everyday staple within the energy sector. I like to compare it a lot to kind of barcodes in the supermarket.
Hmm,
You don't go to the supermarket because of barcodes, but they just make your life a lot easier. Everything is more efficient and it's faster. And
that's a
blockchain
brilliant
technology is a
example.
very, very in its way, in its own way, is similar in that regard. It just optimizes and helps us solve some of these problems that we have with these decentralized energy sources. They will come. What they look like is not yet 100% certain. Like, of course, there will in the next 10 years for sure. We'll have solar, we'll have wind. I think we'll see what is not spoken of enough is we'll see a lot of these small nuclear reactors,
Mm-hmm.
the A1B reactors that were developed originally for the nuclear submarines and for like the large U.S. Navy fleet,
Mm-hmm.
in order to power them. We already see large software companies like Google, like Amazon, kind of pivoting in that direction because they're too afraid that the national grid will not be able to support their data centers.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to become more independent. And I think we'll see the same trend happening with other uh, industry is in general. Like the demand for energy is so high, and I would argue 99% of industries wouldn't work without energy. So we'll have to find ways, and people will probably want to solve it because they're not sure the government will solve it for them. So this kind of prosumer thinking and producing for your own and just making sure that you have the energy necessary to continue your production, I think that will increase. So the dependence on kind of these state-funded grids will really decline over time. So we'll see more of microgrids. We'll see more like even community, what we call local energy markets,
Mm-hmm.
where you have basically self-sustainable communities. When new kind of areas are built or new community projects are built, they make sure to include battery storage. They make sure to include solar power generation, just so that they become at least to a significant amount independent. And we've shown that this works. Like at Powerledger, we've
Mm-hmm.
had projects showing this works. One of them famously is with the University of Chiang Mai in Thailand, that has campuses across Thailand, and they've
Yep.
they've basically shared energy between each other, and they've shown that up to like 49% of daily energy usage can be used from solar, and they've really reduced their carbon footprint by over 40%. And like it's
Wow.
it's 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 really impressive. Of course, these are proof of concepts and it's just for like university campuses, but if you can do it at small scale, it's just a matter of time until we can do it at larger scales, where entire, I would even say entire cities become somewhat self-sustainable, especially in areas like Florida where there is sun, where the climate is really favorable for these types of solutions.
Jacob, it still blows my mind how little we use in Florida solar. I've seen over the course of the last 5 years, I've been here for a long time, kind of you could say an explosion of solar solutions, but I just don't quite understand. Yes, I get the hurricanes, that the damage from the hurricane can, but you have insurance, you have other ways to tackle that problem. But you literally have a sun shining on us. I think it's something close to, if not more than 300 days out of the year.
Yeah.
So we could literally be, to an extent, largely independent, and yet we're not. And there's some. I think what's missing is an educational part. It's not always only the economic benefit that needs to be the selling point of some of these solutions. But I hope that with what you're saying, your example about the blockchain as a barcode and making things easier, and I hope also with some AI that leads to automation, it can get even easier, especially for the American market. I'm sorry of my fellow Americans, but we need things to be so simple, like almost borderline dumb, in order for us to like, oh yeah, yeah, I'll use it. It's easy now, like a microwave. Ten, close the door, done. Then you come back in 2 minutes, your meal is ready. Which it's not the greatest thing, but we're not gonna. That's not the point. But point is, with the simplification of this technology that you guys are working on, with what is going to become available, I really do hope that the topic of energy is going to start switching more into the um, kind of the abundance or plentifulness conversation, that hey, we're now really making our own. I can lend you mine, I can share mine, I can donate mine and get some tax credits or what have you, because I imagine that would be possible. And
Exactly.
if you just have the, you said the word trustless, blockchain is trustless. Some people to this day, a lot of people don't trust blockchain. They associate it with the early days of scams and hype and all kinds of things, exchanges collapsing, money being stolen.
Yeah.
But that's not because of the technology. That's because of people. That's
Correct.
literally because of people.
Yeah.
So if blockchain is going to, with, I guess, help of AI, is going to help to automate those things and simplify it, and you click a couple of buttons on your smartphone or in your smart interface in your home, and it's done, and you have proof and validation, because blockchain is, you cannot go and hack it right now. Maybe somewhere in the future, but that's still, I think, far away with the quantum computers and everything. I think that conversation is more for like a devil's advocate. People throw that in, it's like, oh well, what are you going to do with the quantum computing? What's going to happen then to blockchain? How about we let's get there first.
Exactly.
So yeah, lots of interesting stuff, but I truly hope that uh, the ease and simplification with the evolution of these technologies is going to allow mass adoption of these technologies, of these opportunities, so that we can become more independent and ultimately save money too, right? A lot of
I
savings.
mean, of course, like the economical benefits for this is obvious. I mean, one of the sectors that is obviously really important in the US as well is like the electric vehicle sector. I mean, everybody talks about Tesla nowadays for
Mm-hmm.
for different reasons, maybe, but there's still a relevant. It's still a relevant car, right? And it's it's
Yeah.
it's a relevant part of kind of the future of mobility. And we see it a sector that many people don't really understand, but like logistics, for example, we see
Mm-hmm.
that there's massive orders going out for electric vehicle trucks for logistics companies because they're at this point already cheaper than the traditional diesel trucks. So like there's already a cost benefit to it. But what we also see, and I think that's another part of those hurdles, like the even if there's the financial or the economic benefit or upside to these technologies, there's different hurdles. One is infrastructure in general. Like
Mm-hmm.
all of the incentives nowadays, I mean, you mentioned the tax benefits, a lot of the incentives go into the production of renewable energy,
Mm-hmm.
but nobody talks about the distribution. Because if we just produce and we have no way to distribute it, or we have no way to save it or store it,
Yeah.
then all the production in the world doesn't help us anything. Because unfortunately, especially with solar energy, we still have what is considered or what is called the duck curve, which means we have a lot of production during the day, but not as much consumption.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of consumption during the night, but no production. So that requires improvements in infrastructure, and that includes storage facilities. That includes also new types of usages for your car. Maybe your car isn't just a way to get you from A to B. Maybe your car is going to be a battery for you and help you kind of store energy when you don't need it, so you can use it during the night. It really depends on where you are. And then obviously the third, the kind of the last part, and probably
Mm-hmm.
one of the most important ones, is just generally red tape. Um,
Mm.
uh, in the US, luckily, or in some states at least, it's very easy to just kind of start your own solar farm.
Yeah.
In Texas, you can just basically have a field and plant your solar,
Mm-hmm.
so your solar systems, and then just sell energy, and then you become a solar energy production company. In Europe, that's not as easy like that. There's a lot of red tape involved to actually doing that, a lot of standards, and they hinder growth. And
Yeah.
so I think it's really kind of a balancing act between, yes, user education, government education is important, because
Yeah.
we know governments aren't always favorable of blockchain either. So having these conversations with governments is really important. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at nowadays. And I think we're making good strides. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we see in the US the government is becoming more and more favorable towards Web3. In Switzerland, we've been incredibly lucky to have
Yeah.
some of the most favorable regulations. Is
Amazing.
the
Amazing
reason
what you guys are
why
doing.
Powerledger, originally being an Australian company, is now based in Switzerland. It's why the Ethereum Foundation, the Solana Foundation, like all of the big foundations, they're
Yeah.
all here because our government has been willing to engage in a discourse and engage in kind of the topics. And we see that this is very beneficial for the uptake for these technologies, and we can just hope that it continues going down that path, and it looks like it, and that's fantastic for any of us, because what I really think is important is
Mm-hmm.
this isn't something that just us are going to solve. We can't solve the peer-to-peer energy trading for everyone. It's going to require other people. There's not one blockchain that will be basically responsible for focusing just on kind of these regenerative finance solutions. It is something that we all have to kind of pull on the same like it's the same wagon, and we have to really
Mm-hmm.
kind of work on it together and collaboratively. It's not one company that is going to solve it, or one country that is going to solve it. We have to like
Yeah.
collaboratively solve it, and that's in spirit really what Web3 and blockchain is all about, right? Having this decentralized system that is protocol agnostic, and that is solution agnostic, hardware agnostic, and that's when we really have an impact. But we're still far
Yeah.
away. We're still far away from
Yeah.
that.
Hey, it's still early. I mean, as an industry, if we maybe stamp the inception of this industry, let's say like 2011, 2012, really Bitcoin pioneering the way. Couple of years of a few other things popping on the radar, and then of course Ethereum becoming relevant, and then these layer one systems and blockchain systems evolving. Okay, so let's say that this is a 10-year, a decade old industry. In the grand scheme of things, it's nothing. It's still very early. And yet we look at how much has been achieved. So if we ignore for the second the stuff that has been in the news and headlined, the stuff that makes newspapers and is sensationalist, is always something that sticks in people's minds and leaves in my opinion, unfortunate and unnecessary timestamps and prints in people's minds that, oh, here's a scam, here's this guy, or this guy did this and that, or this, craze about NFTs and ICOs and now meme coins. Yeah, it doesn't help us. But when you were just speaking about and describing opportunities, if you as a listener or viewer of this didn't hear how many opportunities are out there from an infrastructure perspective, how many different types of businesses can be created to work together. And governments who support this will write grants, will give financing. The banking system will absolutely adapt to this as well. The private capital, which tends to lead kind of the direction, I think will be very much interested in this as well. Um, man, there's just I kind of had like the butterflies in my stomach when you're talking about it, like just recognizing how much entrepreneurial activity can happen. And I call it alliance. We need to create a big alliance of projects and businesses and people coming together, understanding that there is no small pie here that we need to fight over.
No.
It's let's continue to expand the pie. What used to be just a couple $1 billion industry, the Web3 industry, crypto industry in general, is now edging closer towards 3 trillion market cap as an industry. Yes, it's still relatively small compared to some of the other big industries, but it's no longer small.
Correct.
It's very opportunistic. So I'm curious, from your view with the work that you do for United Nations, with the United Nations on the task force on digitalization in energy, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see? What's the international chatter like? Who are the more active players? Who are the resistance? Because you always have those players. Like, what's the dynamic, global dynamic in the energy market and their view of how they can use technology to move forward?
So interestingly enough, there's kind of an overlapping theme within the historically looking at how like blockchain developed, the same way how kind of our like nations industrialized. This is not something I've read. This is just something that when I look at the industry, I see a lot of parallels in that regard. Um, for especially industrialized nations, Western nations, they've in the energy market, it has become mostly an oligopoly.
Mm-hmm.
You have a few large energy providers that share the largest chunk of the market. And yes, some markets have seen market liberalizations, but not all of them. And even the ones that have seen them doesn't necessarily mean that the competition really drives down price. There's still I, I wouldn't necessarily call it collusion, but there's definitely some form of kind of price agreement across some
Yeah.
of the key players. In Switzerland, I'll just give you an example. I mean, we are here. It's very, very, very innovative as a nation. We're consistently ranked in kind of the top countries when it comes to innovation. Technology here is massively supported. We see OpenAI just open their European headquarters here. Like we see like large technology companies coming here.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to energy, I still have to buy my energy from the state. I can buy it from one supplier. I have no choice as a consumer. And like this is where there's still a lot of work needs to happen. And when you ask me what regions we see more activity, well, it's the developing nations, because the developing nations have never really built these large grids.
Yeah.
We've spent trillions of dollars or euros or Swiss francs on
Mm-hmm.
establishing these large grids so we can transport energy from the south where it's produced, or the north where it's produced, to the south where it's consumed.
Mm-hmm.
Just to use Germany again, most of the energy production happens in the north, but the most of the consumption happens in the south. So most of the energy has to be transported, and that relies on a massive infrastructure. Well, if you take another example of more developing nations, any country in Southeast Asia, for example, there's large parts of the population that still don't really have access to energy.
Yeah.
Of course, more and more, but they had to find more decentralized, more shared approaches to energy. And that's why they're more open to these solutions that actually enable this sharing. And for us, for example, we've had a huge project with Powerledger,
Mm-hmm.
with the UPPCL, which is basically the Uttar Pradesh Power Corporation Limited.
Mm-hmm.
Which Uttar Pradesh, I mean, I didn't know myself, the largest state in India. We're talking 220 million inhabitants, one state. So that's a lot
Yeah.
of people. And we've had a pilot project with them that included multiple prosumers and consumers,
Mm-hmm.
and that resulted in over 25 megawatts kind of traded between participants. And the project, a pilot, was so successful that Uttar Pradesh at a later point even announced a rule change and a legislation change to include the peer-to-peer trading across the whole state. So meaning that our proof of concepts and pilot projects of projects like ours can really change and influence legislation. And it's the same I see when I do the work with the United Nations
Mm-hmm.
in this regard. We see the openness. There's piloting space more in the developing South. South America has a lot of opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Africa obviously has a lot of opportunity, just given also the geographical opportunities that lie
Mm-hmm.
there, where things can be tested, rolled out, where you have an immediate impact on the livelihood of people because they don't have as much access to energy as we do, and you can test it out and showcase it works, which will then in return really convince our legislators to open up the markets to these types of solutions. So this is, and I think a lot of times when I talk about these projects, people think I'm just kind of like, I want to save the world or I want to save the globe and I want to bring these sustainable solutions. That's not really necessarily it. I truly
Mm-hmm.
believe having impact is important,
Mm-hmm.
but these are also financially viable projects and they lead to long-term contracts with companies, with countries. They improve the livelihood, and if that's just the positive externality of what we do, then
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying no to that. That is fantastic. And there's people in this space obviously that do it for those reasons, and I can only congratulate them because that's a very, very selfless way of thinking about it. But I'm saying there's a lot of financial opportunities in this space as well. And I think when you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
before that, like for the listeners and viewers of this podcast, to encourage them to look into this space, also a lot of times, as kind of a side note, I also mentor startups at the Startup Academy in Switzerland
Yep.
and in various different fields. And a lot of times people ask me, like, like I'm very entrepreneurial, but I don't have the right idea. Well, in this space particularly, you don't necessarily have to have a new idea. Copycat startups are super successful. We see financing plays for solar farms being rolled out in Southeast Asia now that have
Mm-hmm.
been piloted in Germany, and these startups are extremely successful, but they copy paste the business model from Europe and take it to other
Yeah.
parts of the world, and that works, and that is completely viable as a business. So if, like, I think sometimes we overthink and we have to kind of re-innovate in a whole market. We don't. We just have to build something that nobody has had yet and that actually solves someone's problem, and that someone is that has that problem is willing to pay for. And that is true for energy sector, and that is true for the blockchain or crypto space, and that is true for any other space for that matter.
Yeah, and I have not once from you today heard a word subsidy or subsidizing anything. This has been a purely capitalistic conversation, right? With impact to it, right? Yeah, if we can positively impact, that's like I call it the conscious capitalism, not predatory capitalism, where we're just driven by profit. It's game over. When we're driven by, all right, if I can do this and earn X and it's good for all the stakeholders, fantastic model. This is what you're speaking to right now. And I imagine if we add the component of governments around the world shifting their perspectives to upgrading their infrastructures, what we're seeing with, I think, a lot of people misunderstanding the whole project that Elon Musk is spearheading, the Doge project. There's a lot of criticism for it, and I'm not against or for it. I'm not, a supporter or against the particular people in it or Musk himself. But I think the idea that the government is finally taking on that, yeah, let's take an honest look at ourselves. We in 2025 are so obsolete and outdated and antiquated, literally, and antiques. The systems that have been based decades ago, the money going nowhere, the attempt to take an honest look and then upgrade the entire governance to a more modern blockchain based technology, because that's where I believe it's going. First is, okay, let's take a look at where we are, assess, remove the costs, reduce the bulkiness of this whole thing that we called, let's call it administrative governance system. That's a totally, I'm making that up. I'm calling that. And then, okay, how can we use technology, engineering, science, logic, economics, common sense to modernize the government so that we can allocate resources, funding, innovation funds better? Because I'll tell you this: I've came to the United States in 2003, my first time. Since then, the like really entrepreneurial spirit and entrepreneurship in America is driven by small business has been dying, has been hindered so badly that people are discouraged from taking on risky, innovative ideas because even the funding is difficult to get for startups.
Yeah.
It used to come way easier. It used to be easier to get small business administration loan. Now you have to basically, as a startup, show that you're making money right away or have them like. But what if I just have an idea and a group of people that are enthusiastic to get it? My only option is VC. Well, that's not easy to get through. So I welcome this government initiative that is against all odds taking on themselves with the help of the tech geeks. I'll call them that. And I hope that more of that happens over the world where the governance systems will upgrade to a newer technology. Hopefully, we'll use blockchain as well, which is trustless. You don't need to rely on trusting it. It works. You cannot hack into it and hack out of it. It's very difficult. The cases that we see are typically led by people related vulnerabilities. Somebody's key, somebody's password, somebody's not because the technology is unsound. There's bad players everywhere. Even in traditional technology, we call them, cybersecurity, hackers. They've always been around. It's always a cat and mouse game. So I'm curious from your now perspective too, what government's involvement, how can governments around the world get more active and proactive and supportive of these different initiatives? Are you hearing anything? Are there any examples that, in addition to what you've already said, that you have where this is actually happening? Any thoughts about just governments around the world, and just modernizing their approach to support this type of innovation so that a bunch more people can start projects like what we're talking about and just help each other?
Yeah, I think you pointed out like one of the key issues, and that's just generally inefficiencies. I think inefficiencies are not unique to governments, but they have been just governments have been more prone to inefficiencies. Um, it's inefficiencies we see with a lot of legacy systems, and I would even go as far, and I know probably a few Ethereum maxis will not like me for saying that, but having a system like Ethereum and being like a pioneer, and there's no other way to say this, when it comes to smart contract platforms or smart contract protocols, Ethereum was the pioneer. Without Ethereum, I don't think we'd have a Solana today. A, Maybe a Solana, yes, but definitely not a Sui, and definitely not a Base, and not
Correct.
any of those. And um, I think they've grown so much, and they have become very, very slow, and they've been very it's been very difficult for them to actually innovate, even though they have some of the smartest people, and they're taking a more an approach where where they're showing, we're inefficient here, we need to change this. But even their move to becoming a proof of stake protocol has
Mm-hmm.
taken several years. It's not just something that they could do over
Yeah.
time. And we look at something as small as Ethereum, obviously large in the bigger crypto
Mm-hmm.
space, but in comparison to the US government, for example, that's just a very, very small part. So I encourage approaches to make things more efficient, but I think we have to be realistic that this is not something that will happen overnight. Like, there's a
No.
lot of roadblocks in the way, there's a lot of things that have to be changed. And in any system, there's always very capable people doing things, but sometimes there's just a few lazinesses here, a few systems that have been here, a few costs that are associated with changing something that somebody doesn't want to speak, and then you get yourself into this system where you're just not running efficiently. When it comes to the energy market, and I'm going to come back again to, I
Mm-hmm.
know it might not be as interesting for the American listeners, but Europe obviously is not one country like the US.
Correct.
So every country has their own, although there's the EU, every country has also their own independent rules and legislations. And Austria, a neighbor of us in Switzerland and a neighbor
Mm-hmm.
of Germany, is actually at the forefront. So for them, any energy company is legally required to offer a system for peer-to-peer trading of energy. And we see
That's
the
awesome.
same being implemented in Italy now. We have projects that we've done in France where consumers, and I think that is one thing I always want to encourage. We live in a consumer society.
Mm-hmm.
So consumers and their purchasing behavior has power. It has a massive impact on
Massive power.
what type of solution is being provided. And one of our partners basically, they had consumers that requested from them that they want to be able to see what energy they're consuming at what point of day, and they wanted to be able to choose, I rather pay more for my solar energy than that I use only nuclear energy.
Mm-hmm.
And then the energy provider basically came and said, okay, for let's say we have 50% nuclear and then 50% renewable energy, here's your mix. You can choose how you want to make that mix up depending what is available currently on the grid. And that's like, that shows how much as a consumer you can influence that. And consumers also have an influence on the government, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we vote for government, and government wants to stay, whether this is what the government is supposed to do or not, but government wants to stay in power.
Yeah.
That's I think that's kind of a universal law at this point.
Yeah.
Even though we know Plato already said those that don't want to govern are probably the ones that should be governing, but unfortunately, that's not really the system that we have in place. But
Mm-hmm.
that shows that you as a voter, that you as a consumer, you have a massive impact on what your countries do. And to speak on Switzerland, which of course is in a unique situation because
Mm-hmm.
we're probably the most democratic country in the world, with us having
Yeah.
the possibility to vote on every new legislation and even propose legislation as a citizen. We just recently voted last year that there's going to be new solutions for renewable energy, and that there's going to be a minimum tariff that has to be paid if you feed back to the grid. Those are things that didn't exist before.
Mm-hmm.
So the energy companies could just make it up. So now the government
Mm.
steps in and says, you know what, it's not possible that people that produce energy don't get any money from you for giving you that energy. And so like there is positive impact being driven. And I think I really want to urge consumers to kind of try pushing for these initiatives as well.
Yeah.
Because I think they're oftentimes we think it's new companies, startups that have to bring innovation. They're doing it, believe me. Like I see so many startups doing and going through it, but they have issues themselves, as you mentioned. Like, where do they get the funding from? And even if they get funding, it's usually dilutive funding, which is also not great for a startup. And if I just start out and I already lose 40% of what I'm building for a few $1,000, then like, where's my benefit from actually building something? And so we have to solve these issues as well. But the consumer is not often talked about, but the consumer also has a responsibility in this regard, in my opinion.
I have an interesting question about the consumer then. With the proliferation of blockchain into our different parts of our lives, there is a part to blockchain that shares governance. Sometimes we refer to these organizations DAOs, right? Decentralized autonomous organizations. But the part that those companies or structures do is they give the voting power to the people. You were just talking about Switzerland, where everybody can vote regularly all the time on things, even propose. Blockchain, at its core, has this capability to allow consumers to actively vote, and I think, given the technology, also implement. So I'm curious, from your perspective, do you see that possible? Um, do you have a version of how this could evolve into the future in specifically the energy space, but also beyond it? Like, what are your thoughts there?
So I have two thoughts on this. I think on the one side, that is what idealistically would be the solution.
Mm-hmm.
We know it's not that easy, and I talked about Switzerland, but I'm also aware that even on the scale of Germany with 80 million inhabitants, the Swiss system will probably not work.
Mm-hmm.
because it's just too many people. So some systems work at a scale. Switzerland with 9 million inhabitants, that just kind of works. The size of, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know, a state like Massachusetts, we're talking really, really small
Mm-hmm.
scales to run these systems. But there's probably a middle way in this regard. One thing I have to say and point out is that there is definitive examples, not just with DAOs
Mm-hmm.
that are interesting. Um, I'm not the biggest fan of DAOs. I would argue a lot of the DAOs haven't really worked out
Mm-hmm.
what they're originally tried to do. But there's layer one examples. I mean, improvements propositions, for example, and we have a blockchain like Tezos layer one that is not often spoken about,
Mm-hmm.
but they've upgraded, I think, 19 or 20 times. Please don't quote me on the numbers, but that
Mm-hmm.
is basically fully done by proposal from validators that is then being voted on by validators. And like this is that upgradability and that governance side of things that Tezos has had, a protocol that has been around for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
one of the really early ones, uh, shows that it's possible to do it. I think there is, however, also risk with decentralization. And that is especially in early stages. And I know that sounds counterintuitive,
Mm-hmm.
especially for like the really Web3 maxis. And I would call myself a Web3 proponent, but I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't call myself a Web3 maxi because I don't think, or blockchain maxi, I don't think everything needs to be solved with blockchain. Just because you
Correct.
have a tool, blockchain, that resembles a hammer, not everything is a nail. Some
Correct.
things, some things,
Correct. Correct. I love that.
some things really work. Other things might not work. And what we see is that protocols that have a very strong leadership and a very strong influence. I'm not saying they're centralized
Mm-hmm.
because I use the example of Solana, one that
Mm-hmm.
we're active. Our token is on Solana, the Power
Mm-hmm.
token, but we have a very strong voice in Anatoly, the co-founder of the
Mm-hmm.
Solana protocol, and the Solana Foundation and Solana Labs. Now Anza Labs being very proactive in building and proposing changes to the protocol, and you have even Wall Street companies like Jump Trading and Jump Crypto building new tools for Solana to become more efficient. And yes, that is a form of centralization when it comes to building, but it's also the reason why Solana has been able to reinvent after
Yeah.
this whole FTX debacle, where
Yeah.
everybody was like, Solana is done, it's never coming back. And now we're
Mm-hmm.
looking at it and we're like, it's thriving more than ever. I would argue.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, right now is a bit of a difficult moment to look at it in the market, but generally, the sentiment that you get from developers in the space and from usages.
Yeah.
Of course, you have meme coins, whether that is the use case that you want to use as like the thing that is the most beneficial to society.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not, but it shows that there's usage and that there's people that are using it and there's demand for it, and the technology enables all these things. And so there comes a benefit from some form of centralization.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the Ethereum space, it's more decentralized and it's almost become like a winner's circle where some people that have been in it early on have
Mm-hmm.
accumulated quite a lot of wealth
Yeah.
through the ETH token, and they're not as interested in changing things. So it's like it's very difficult for a new project to actually enter the space because it
Mm-hmm.
just becomes so costly. So they are losing now the market share to the layer twos, whether
Mm-hmm.
that's space or whether that's optimism or whatever, you name it. And I think I want to recommend that you mentioned the book before, and I think
Mm-hmm.
it's probably up there in my top three favorite books ever. There's a book by Asimoglu and Robinson. They won a Nobel Prize for it. It's called Why Nations Fail, and
Ooh.
it's in its essence, it writes about that every nation has a political side and an economic side, and
Mm-hmm.
that side can either be extrinsic, so open, or it can be intrinsic, so more closed. So there's an extrinsic or an intrinsic political side and an extrinsic and an intrinsic um, uh, economic side. And it shows based on historical data that countries that have shown especially intrinsic political systems have been very, very good at growing. South Korea is a famous example.
Mm-hmm.
After the Korean War, it was really politically closed. I wouldn't say it was authoritarian, but it was definitely not really a democracy. And
Mm-hmm.
that allowed to pool the funds and build the things that were really important to build. Whereas the market stayed liberal and open, it allowed to really build these chaebols out, these huge companies
Mm-hmm.
like LG and like Samsung and all of these companies that have been incredibly important of driving value. So there's benefits to both of them. And they argued that the long time equilibrium is where both are extrinsic, like both of them are open. But in the initial stage, to get to this equilibrium, you probably need one of them to be intrinsic in order to generate and kind of focus and pool funds and attention to one specific thing. And I think, and again, that's not a recommendation for me that any of this is better than anything else. I'm just
Yeah.
saying, I think if we look at these historical examples, it's extremely interesting to see that decentralization and just fully like having everyone have a say doesn't always work in these initial stages until
Mm-hmm.
something gets to a certain point. And I would argue that some of the protocols that we consider are at that point might not be at that point yet. I think we're still very, as you mentioned before, we're early on,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of things we still have to improve on, especially consumer experience. Like user experience is the one
Yes.
thing that we still haven't figured out. We still don't we still don't have solid ways of on-ramping and off-ramping. Like a credit card on-ramp just is too costly. We're not going to
Yeah.
do it. Centralized exchanges, just they're a high risk. So are there other ways for us to on-ramp and off-ramp? Maybe that don't require extensive KYCing. These are all things that add to the user experience. And when
Mm-hmm.
like when I talk to my parents and they're like, "Oh, I'm so interested, where can I buy the token of yours?" And I'm like, "You have to do this, you have to download this app, you have to create an account there." They're like, "Oh,
Right.
maybe
Lost.
I'll
Interest
give
lost.
you some money and you send me the tokens or you do it for me." And I'm like, "Okay, that works." But a lot of people don't have someone in their lives that can show them how it
Correct.
works. So it has to be foolproof. I think that's really circling back to what you said
Yeah.
before about the microwave example. I think universally it has to be so simple that people just do it without really understanding what's going on in the background. Because technologically, the technology, the Web3 technologies, the blockchain technology is so complex that even for someone like me or you that works in the
Yeah.
industry, we can't know everything. We don't know
No way.
all the
No
cryptographic
way.
rules. We
Absolutely
don't know
cannot. Yeah.
how the CK hashes are calculated. We're not cryptographers, or I am not at least.
Me
But
neither.
but there's a so we need to get to a point where we can really rely on this trustless nature of the system, but the user experience has to be at the forefront in order for us to get really that consumer onboarding done. That next billion users that everybody always asks me,
There you
which
go.
use case is doing that? And I'm telling you, it's user experience. It's not gaming, it's not arts, it's not energy either. It's user experience. Once we've solved the user experience, we'll immediately get to that billion user number.
Couldn't agree more. There's really not much I can even add to this because I'm just like I'm nodding a lot in the last couple of minutes because you're hitting every single major important point here. There is no silver bullet here yet, and collectively, if we figure out the inter chain interoperability, the ease of changing, exchanging, and depositing, onboarding, offboarding, withdrawing, without the need to go through complicated actions and multiple steps and password here and password there, verify here, some phrases, wallet, what wallet, like all of that. Like my commitment and what we're doing is to continue to educate, and I see more and more people in the industry that are very passionate about understanding their role and duty. Whatever they're doing financially, fantastic. Whatever we're doing economically, fantastic. But the duty, if we're here to expose these important topics and ideas to other people, our peers, even our immediate surroundings, our friends, family members, if we can each, like you and I, hit 15, 20, 30 people in our communities and they introduce it to at least 5 more, that kind of network effect is what's needed in the industry, because we will win or lose this game together. And I think, given that it's been now over a decade and we haven't lost yet, and the industry continues to push on, haven't been unregulated and complete Wild West in most parts of the world. Now regulation is coming in. Now the rules are being set kind of globally everywhere. US is following now all of the other countries that have been kind of ahead of us from a regulatory perspective. I do believe that we're entering kind of the second phase, kind of like large second decade of sobering up, getting the right necessary clarity. The hangover stage of all of this Wild West is practically over. And that means risk is going to get reduced and money and capital is going to get infused. When that happens, historically, in any industry, all kinds of projects start. Obviously, that sometimes creates its own bubbles. It's inevitable. Everything, goes through these phases, but we then see mass adoption starting.
Yeah.
And that's where that 1 billion number becomes a reality. And UX made the UX lead the way. So to all of you out there in UX space, we need more of you to help us solve this 1 billion user problem that we have in the industry.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. And I know there's always people that ask me how they can get into this space. And you basically just answered it. Focus on what you're good at. Focus on the industry you're good at. There is, for any industry, there's a Web3 use case. It might not always be the most obvious one, but there's always one. And we need good developers. We need good UI developers. We need people that are smart on their feet, and they really want to have an impact and kind of proliferate this technology to other sectors. And I know you said it's no longer Wild West, and I agree with that, but I still think we're a developers' playground. There's still a bit of like, let's throw everything at the dartboard and see what sticks.
Yeah.
And that's good, and it's okay that it's like that. That just shows that there's a lot of opportunity. And with certain things, especially regulation, it's important. I know a lot of people always say, well, we want less and less regulation, especially in Switzerland. That's a common saying. We're always over-regulated, or Europe in general. We're over-regulated everywhere. Well, to be fair, that is true. It can get to a point where it's no longer good. But within Web3, within crypto, we need at least some guardrails.
Yes.
Because otherwise, we don't know what the future will bring, and we'll need to generate some certainty to really bring that external capital. And seeing that that Wall Street is moving into this space, that we have ETFs now, that we have money market funds moving on chain. We have MasterCard just announced that they're working on a credit card, a blockchain.
Amex partnering with Ripple.
Amex is doing it. PayPal, Ripple, you name, like, with these companies coming in and building solutions for the everyday user, that only happens because there's some form of regulation, and that will just lead to even more opportunities. So yes, when people ask me, has the train already left the station for crypto, then I can very, very confidently say no, that's not the case. There's still a lot of opportunities. We're still very early on. It's still only a lot of developers and maxis that are in the space. The majority of people still doesn't understand it. So you can still really build something meaningful and something that becomes successful financially, but also within this space.
Yeah. Wow, Jakob, thank you so much for this insightful conversation, discussion, your ideas, your expertise. So valuable. I truly believe that this has been a really good one for the listeners and viewers out there. I'm also going to pronounce your actual name and last name in a non-Americanized or Anglicized way, it's Jakob Stammler. Ladies and gentlemen, please follow this gentleman everywhere he's at. If there's any particular space, Jakob, that you want to highlight, let people know where they can find you or where you're publishing your work, where you're most active, and we'll wrap up the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Sergey, for having me, and great pronunciation on my name. If anyone wants to reach out, you can find me. Twitter is the easiest at Jakob Stammler, just first name, last name, super easy. I share a lot of my thoughts in the industries and on the different use cases, not just energy focused. Reach out if you have any questions. I'm also on Telegram at Stammler Jacob, so just the other way around. Please reach out, and yeah, hopefully we can have a chat in the near future to see how the industry has evolved.
Yeah, look forward to having you back in the future.
Perfect.
Jakob,
Thanks a lot,
thank you
Sergey.
so much. Thank you, everybody. See you next time.